Tonight, we continue chapter 33 with a second parable to understand the ununderstandable, how creation in no way changed God, with the sun, the rays, the power of the rays here, their non-existence by planet sun, and really delving into this to give us a personal and deep insight, making incomprehensible something relatable. Please subscribe and share if you know someone who can benefit. Thank you.
It's nearby Odessa, but very soon they moved to Azerbaijan because Ukraine was in hunger at that time. And from there, his life spent before war and after war. He, as you see by his name, he was Aron ben Shlomo, and all relatives called him Arele. But while he was during the war as a soldier, his commander said that let's change your documents to be more not Jewish, because if you get into captivity, you won't be killed like as all Jews. So his name became Arkady. And that's how we went on afterwards. But in family, he was Aaron. And he was very, very. There was, unfortunately, as he grew up and I grew up, there wasn't observance, but Yiddishkeit was in our family. He spoke with my mom only in Yiddish, and everything was around Yiddishkeit. I don't know, holidays and songs he would sing in Yiddish, and some songs were not very. My mom was always yelled at him that not supposed to be said those words. Not every Yiddish word was apparently nice, but he was singing. He liked to sing. He had very good voice. And then I did not know that. I only learned here while I was in Chabad. And on gathering, men would not even sing; they would just chant some melody chant and hit the table like with their palms. And that's what my father did all the time. And it was like reminded me, I had no idea that probably somehow it's from his childhood he remembered like those just melodies. And Rosh Hashanah is coming, and he always imitated like he's doing shofar with his just with his voice. And I, like, for me, as a child, what does it mean, shofar, and what? But he did it, so for me it was like my dad's thing, like a spiel. I don't know what it is, but only being United States and being to synagogue, I kind of connected all dots. So yes, he went through war. He was mechanic in aircraft mechanics, and he came home, and then he had marriage one. Then he unfortunately didn't work out, and then marriage with my mother. I was at this marriage, and we were very happy family. I was very protected by him. For him, his children were like number one. If somebody wanted to get in good mood with him or on a good food, like they would ask, "How are your children doing?" And that's it. That would be the most important for him. So that was very, very, very touching. Like I always knew that like, the best children in the world are his children. And if my mom would say something to like, oh, my daughter did not do well, let's say, in something, or didn't help me out, how dare you to say something? So what? So she did not wash her dishes, so big deal. I washed for her. It's the same thing. So yes, he would always was very, very
beautiful.
And yes, and then his grandchildren, of course, it was his life, and he passed away in 2004. So that's it. That's life was very
beautiful.
Busy, very.
He was great. Be a blessing,
and
everything you're doing, should be a blessing for him. Every good deed you do helps his family. Every good deed you do, even if you don't have him in mind. Every good thing you do as a parent, as a child, automatically helps the parent.
Thank you.
Every good deed you do, every mitzvah you do, every time you study Torah, every time you say a blessing, every time you say a prayer, all of it automatically helps elevation of his soul, as will the class tonight. So we're continuing, dedicating to Miriam's father, whose yahrzeit is tomorrow night, Aharon, the son of Shlomo. And we are continuing in chapter 33. So we began chapter 33 last week. We said we are going to a totally new level of depth in terms of Hasidic thought. And hopefully it was like, wow, very impactful. And we're discussing here actually joy. And the joy we have when we understand God's presence in our world, and when we realize how close we can be to God. And the more we understand his greatness and understand that we can be so close, the more joy there is. Because the greater he is, the more awesome and joyous it is that little me can be so close to God, the King of Kings, the creator of all, and me, and we're one. And he listens to every little thing I say. We're that close. So this actually creates, as we're going to discuss, a deep joy in my merit, in the specialness I have, that I could be that close to the creator. So as I said, we're in chapter 33. We are on page, in the Hebrew, it's Mem Beis. 2, 4, 6, 8, 9 lines from the top. So what we did last class was we went through 4 levels of understanding God vis-a-vis creation. The smallest level, God constricted within creation, then God more, so to speak, surrounding creation, then God at a level that it's all, so to speak, irrelevant, he's so beyond it all, and then this highest level that it's all him, that there's nothing but him, that all of creation is him. And we said that's a very hard thing for us to understand, that it's all him and there's nothing but him, because to us it feels like we're quite real. And this world is quite real. And of course, we've discussed this concept at length in chapter 20 and 21 and 22, but it's still a bit of a stretch for us. So the Rebbe is giving us 2 metaphors, 2 parables, for us to wrap our mind around this concept more. Because when we have a metaphor, a parable, we understand the parable, then we could extrapolate and understand what it's a parable for, which in this case means God's absolute oneness. And how creation, this is of course the idea that's very hard for us to understand, how creation didn't change him at all. Because we're like, what are you talking about? First, there's God. And now there's God plus or minus, however you want to look at it, creation. Either you want to say God got added to, now it's God plus creation, or God got shrunken because it's God and now he's smaller because there's also creation. But either way, it definitely seems like quite a big change. God says, no change. I was, is, will be exactly the same. Before there was me, now there's me, and everything you see, and it's absolutely no change. How can there be no change? Because it's all nothing. What does that mean? I mean, it's all nothing. It seems like a lot of something. So we were given here, last week we did one, and today we're going to do the second one, 2 different misholim, 2 different parables, metaphors, to understand this concept of how creation in no way changed God, in no way affected him, in no way impacted him. Last week we gave a more, if you will, spiritual parable, a non-physical parable, spoke about speech. And what's a word to the power of speech? What's a word to the power of thought, from which the power of speech comes? What's a word to the powers of soul, from which comes the power of thought, from which comes the power of speech? What's a word to the soul itself, from which comes the powers of the soul, from which comes the power of speech, from which comes the power of words, from which comes this word? It's nothing, 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 nothing. Well, that's creation vis-a-vis God. Why is that a great metaphor? Because creation is God's speech. God spoke, and it is. God said, and creation happened. What is creation? God's words. Everything, the book, this pen, me, you, the computer, everything, or the phone if you're on that, everything in our world, everything we see and don't see, and all the spiritual worlds are all words of God. So since they're all words of God, this metaphor of words and their nothingness vis-a-vis the being of the sayer of the words is actually precisely what's going on. Creation is a lot of words. And what's those words in contrast to the sayer of the words, who's God? And when we gave the metaphor, we didn't even speak about the speaker being infinite. We're talking about ourselves as humans. Me as a human being. What's one word? I speak all the time. Do I know a word? Did a word add to me? Did a word subtract from me? Did a word change me? A word compared to all my vast reservoir of words, compared to the power of thought that's even more vast, from which comes my power of speech, compared to the powers of my soul that's even more remote, compared to the soul itself, that one word in the soul itself. And I'm a human being. I'm limited. I'm finite. Now talk about God. What are words compared to him? So if creation is just words, obviously creation isn't changing. That was last week's metaphor. Now we're giving a more physical metaphor. So the advantage of this one is it's more physical. So we can relate to this in a more concrete way, because maybe for us, a word to the power of words, to the power of speech, to the powers of soul, to the soul itself, maybe it's like, I skipped actually, there's also the subconscious. Power of words, power of thought, subconscious thought, powers of the soul, soul itself, right? And then think about it compared to God, who's infinite. So obviously the words, i.e. creation, aren't changing God. So on one hand, that's a really great metaphor, because we can clearly see how a word doesn't change me. So obviously a word wouldn't change God, and creation is words. But it's still not something you can really put your hands on, so to speak, words and these powers. So now we have another metaphor that's talking about something very concrete and physical. So it might be better for us. But of course, it's not as precise as the previous one, because the previous one, this is creation. Creation is God's words. So that's really powerful from that aspect. So reading the second metaphor, second parable. Mashal Gashmi Lizet, a more physical metaphor for this. Me'inyan bitul ziv or hashemesh b'mekayra hu guf kador hashemesh. If we're looking at the matter of the nullification of the rays, the light of the sun in its source, which is the planet, the body of the sun itself, Shebirakia, out there in the heaven, as versus the light and rays on planet Earth. Shagam sham meir mispashet, vadai, zivo, va'oro. So surely, if these rays millions of miles away from the sun are shining on planet Earth, of course they exist by planet sun. And obviously they're much stronger because they're much closer to the sun. In contrast to how they're shining in our world, but we don't see them there at all. But there they are completely nullified out of their existence. In their source. They're in their source, and that's why they're not visible at all. And it says of this, they're not existent at all. So what is this metaphor saying? This parable. This is a parable used in Hasidic thought in various places, just as the previous one was as well. We have a sun, okay? Millions of miles away, there's planet sun. Burning hot, 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 intense. I use this hot. That's obviously a very pale word for the burning intensity of the heat of the sun. From the sun emerges rays. Those rays travel millions of miles. The sun is that powerful, right? It's from that perspective, the most powerful planet in our solar system. Obviously, from a spiritual perspective, we're the movers and shakers of the solar system. But in terms of raw power, there's nothing as powerful as the sun. So the light, the rays, which are extending the light of the sun, reach millions of miles away to our planet, to Earth. And that's the light that we enjoy every single day. That light gives us heat, warmth, energy, the ability to see sunlight. So we have the light of the sun as light, visible light, as a source of energy, as heat, as warmth. It allows humans to live, what allows plant life to grow. So that sunlight is very powerful force. Of course, everything's positioned very, very precisely by God. If we were closer to the sun than we currently are, no life would exist. We'd be too close. And if we were further than the sun than we currently are, no life would exist. We'd be too far. As we see the planets going in either direction, the one closer is too close for life to exist, and the one further is too far for life to exist. So God is very, very precise, the exact position of our planet vis-a-vis the sun. This exact distance of millions of miles is precisely what we need to have the light and the heat and the energy, not too little and not too much, for life to exist and flourish. What's giving us all that? The rays of the sun. Well, where are the rays coming from? Well, the sun, obviously, right, obviously. So if these rays have such power on planet Earth, obviously, if I travel back, the closer I get to the sun itself, the more powerful those rays are going to be. As I said, the planet next in line closer to the sun, the rays are too intense. Life can't exist. And they get closer than that, and they get closer than that. So obviously, as we all understand, no question, the closer the rays get, let me just finish the concept, then I'll take a comment. The closer the rays get to the sun, the more powerful those rays are. So what happens at the sun itself? At the sun itself, we don't see the rays at all. Why not? Do they not exist? They suddenly materialize, however many miles away from the sun when we can observe them? No, because they're at their source. However powerful those rays are, and those rays are very, very powerful, it's nothing compared to the planet sun itself. So in contrast to the planet sun, the rays literally have no existence. So the rays of the sun cannot be measured, cannot be quantified, cannot be visible as we get very close to the sun itself. But when we move away from the sun, suddenly we can see, we can observe the rays, which again, even though we're so far from the sun, are still so, so powerful. So this is just a fact, and a fact that we should be able to grasp, because we're talking about physical things. We understand our planet, we understand sunlight, we understand the rays of the sun, we understand the sun, as you get closer to the sun, the rays get more powerful, and we understand that at the sun itself, you can't even see the rays at all, because they're so overwhelmed by the intensity of the energy of the sun, they're not visible at all. So everything here probably, hopefully, made perfect sense. That is a metaphor. It's another metaphor to understand how creation doesn't exist, so to speak, in contrast to God's reality. In other words, we said everything is God, there is nothing but God, and creation in no way changed God at all. He was, he is, he will be. Creation in no way affected him. And we're like, what do you mean? How are we not affecting him? And the answer was because we're like nothing compared to him. So nothing, it's like we don't exist. So in the first metaphor with the words, and we're like, oh, yeah, we get that. What's a word compared to the power of speech and the power of thought and the power of subconscious thought and the power of the souls and the soul itself? And then talking about God's infinity, obviously a word isn't impacted. Now we're saying from a very different angle, if the rays that are so, so powerful, that are powerfully affecting our planet so far from the planet sun, and the closer we get to sun, the more powerful those rays become. And those rays are not seen at all when they're in their source. When they're by their source, the planet itself, the sun itself, we don't see the rays at all. Why? Because in contrast to their source, in contrast to the intensity of the energy of their source, they don't exist. They're nothing. These powerful rays that are illuminating our planet are nothing in contrast to the energy of the sun, which means, in decoded, all of creation that seems very powerful, we don't just mean our planet, we don't just mean our solar system, we don't just mean the Milky Way, we mean every spiritual reality as well. It seems like a lot and very powerful. It takes up a lot of space. It's very big. True. But in contrast to its source, it's nothing. In contrast to the sun, the rays are nothing. In contrast to the source of God that's vivifying everything, all of creation is nothing. So there's a key difference between the storyline of the sun and the rays and the reality we're talking about, creation and God. Because the rays have moved very far from the sun, millions of miles. And that's why in our world, those rays are a thing and a substance and a force and very powerful and needed. And when you get to them in their source, we don't see them at all. But by creation, creation is always in its source. It's not that God's a million miles away vivifying creation. God is right here within every element of creation. So creation is always in its source, which means if we had the eyes to see that, we don't. Obviously, the energy of creation is nothing compared to its source. As obviously, very, very pale comparison, the rays are nothing compared to the planet sun. So that's how we can understand, just as the rays don't exist by the sun, creation exists, but truly doesn't exist. In contrast to its source that's always within it, the energy of God. So I know Fega Chaya had her hand raised. Anyone else have any questions on the metaphor, on the sun and the rays, or the speech and the power of speech and the speaker, or of course, the reality we're talking about, creation's non-existence vis-a-vis God. Fega Chaya, what did you want to add?
So I just read once in this kid's book, I think it was a National Geographic book, that like, why is the sun ray, you know, we can see the sun and the rays coming from the sun, but and then there's outer space and it's very dark there, yet the sun lights up the earth. Why? Because of the dust on the earth. The dust reflects the sun's rays. I just thought that was really interesting. I hope that fits here. Does
well,
it fit
I
here?
think what I would say it fits with is what I was parenthetically throwing in before. So thank you for that new bit of information. I was totally parenthetical to the point of this chapter, but you know, we of course feel free to ramble that the precision of God in having this world, the only world of life, how everything is so perfect.
Exactly. Which is why
it's detail. And what you're saying is exactly another dimension, and it really showing how many details we don't know. And yet each one is exactly in place so we could exist. So God's desire could be that there could be life, there could be people, and we could freely choose to serve him. So thank you for that new piece of information. I hope I will remember it.
Okay, that's really great. That's why it's always brighter sun in the desert, because there's more dust.
More dust.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
I'll accept that one.
I'm glad I got to call in. Thank you so much. I love your class.
Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone have any questions or thoughts, or just questions on either the story of the sun and the rays, the words on the speaker, or the reality we're trying to understand, God's unchanging dimension despite creation? Okay, I hope that means it was like so perfectly clear, which is wonderful. So we'll read a little more where the Rebbe explains the metaphor, as I just said. It's really special because tonight is the 18th of Elul, the birthday of the founder of Hasidic movement, Rabbi Yisrael Baal Shem Tov, and the birthday of the founder of Chabad Hasidus, the Alter Rebbe, the author of the Tanya, the work we are studying. So it's really, really a special merit that we can have this class and with the energy of the birthday of the author of this work. Of course, as we know that by the righteous, by the tzaddikim, they put themselves in their work. So it's not just something written, 200 plus years ago. It's really his energy. His energy is within every word we study. And therefore, it's really a very, very special thing that we can be studying this tonight. So continuing looking inside, the Kacham Mamish, and so too, literally, Derech Mashal in this metaphor, this parable, who Bittul Ha'olam Umlaya is the nullification of creation, of the world and everything in it. B'mitzias, literally having no existence. L'gabe Mekairo. If we contrast creation to its source, Shehu Ein Sof Baruch Hu, the infinity of God, which is within every aspect of all of creation. Literally the same. I was talking about the dust, the pens, the spiritual realities within, that's angels. Angels are creation, spiritual realities are creation, Gan Edens are creation. Hence, our creation within everything is the same infinity of God, and therefore everything is nullified in contrast to that infinity, as the rays are in contrast to the sun itself. Sham, as explained there in that Kabbalistic reference at length.